So, Black Widow just came out today, so let's do some catching up on the MCU, but specifically the 3D versions. If you're a fan of 3D, then you probably already know that the first three entries in the series were not made in 3D, and those would be 2008's Iron Man, also 2008's The Incredible Hulk, and 2010's Iron Man 2. They skipped a year. And then the next year, 2011, came Thor, which was the first one in the series to be released in 3D. And this was at a time when movies were just starting to catch on being released in 3D, especially with a lot of post conversions. Some of them weren't that great. Even the ones that were technically good for their time were still much weaker than they would be today. And the same is true of Thor. It was weak compared to what we would get nowadays, but it did have rounded faces, and otherwise it was very good for the time period it was made in. Also that year came Captain America, the first Avenger. This was also on the weaker side compared to nowadays, but it was steadily improving. There were several pop-outs out of the screen that were, in-your-face moments, and they were done fairly well. But there were also some things that they couldn't do well quite yet, like transparencies such as glass. And with those, it ended up looking like it was melded into the background. It wasn't convincing. But that was few and far between. And then the next year, 2012, came the first team-up film, Avengers. You'll notice the 3D movies I showed you so far are UK imports, although these were released in the US on 3D. That just happens to be the versions I have. But this UK version of Avengers, notice? That's right, it has a different title. It's called Avengers Assemble. And same thing on the opening titles of the movie, that's what it says. So that's kind of interesting having an alternate title. All the movies before Avengers were all the scope, extra wide scope ratio, where even if you watch it on a modern HD TV, it'll have the black bars on the top and bottom. But Avengers was 16 by 9, so it had that taller ratio. This also had milder 3D throughout, but at the end, during the long finale, that's where they really ramped it up, and the progress was shown. Really powerful 3D in those sequences. And then the following year, 2013, came Iron Man 3, and this was good 3D. Nothing special beyond that, just decent. I also have a foreign copy. I'm just not positive what country it's from. But you'll notice it even has a LG endorsement right there. I'm not sure. Maybe it was a promotional copy for one of their electronics. But it's some other language, and it has dots above the O's. So that's all I can tell you. Also that year, 2013, came Thor: The Dark World. This was that same good but weaker 3D. There were a handful of standout shots that were better, but usually it was because they were easier to convert shots or because they involved CGI, which is easier to do better. Then the next year, 2014, came Captain America: The Winter Soldier. Or, as it was released in some markets, they didn't emphasize America. Oh, by the way, the first Captain America movie, in some markets that was called The First Avenger. No America in it. And same with the sequel. Instead of Captain America: The Winter Soldier, in some markets it was called The Return of the First Avenger, as this Blu-ray shows. However, unlike Avengers Assembled, it's not really changed to that title. When you watch the movie, it has the original title baked into it, but it's just the marketing and the packaging that lists it as this alternate title. And as for the 3D in that, it was good, solid 3D. And then also that year, 2014, came Guardians of the Galaxy. And this was great 3D. This is, in my opinion, where it really started to step up in quality. Really powerful parallax, eye-popping shots. And this is also the first one to be dual ratio. You get the scope ratio and then the taller ratio, and it regularly jumps back and forth based on the director's choice on different contexts. And then the next year, 2015, came Avengers: Age of Ultron. I actually have the American version on this copy. This Blu-ray is all scope ratio, and interestingly enough, the 3D is dialed back a bit. It's stopped the progression and backpedaled a little bit. It's subtler, it's milder, and even on one of the shots towards the finale, where there's a big team-up shot of all the Avengers rotating, um, it's an effects-heavy shot. You'd think it would be converted one of the best in the film, but it wasn't. It looked like it was almost auto-converted, like very little separation between layers. Um, but so obviously they didn't render that from the 3D animation. They just converted it quickly. But at least the rest of the movie is good 3D, just not great. Also that year came one of my favorites, Ant-Man. This one was made in the taller aspect ratio, and it fits it perfectly. And it's back to excellent 3D again. And this really works well with the miniaturization effect, especially when they use blur around objects. It really changes the focus, and it enhances the effect that this guy has shrunk very, very small. And there's also like warped curved edges, and coupled with this excellent 3D, it works really well. It's very convincing. And it takes you on a ride too, like when he's jumping on those ants back and flying around. Works very well. Then the next year, 2016, there's Captain America Civil War. There's a few things to say about this. First of all, it's good 3D, just not excellent. Again, it dials it back a little bit. Um, it's also dual ratio, but unlike the other dual ratio films, it's not jumping back and forth constantly. The vast majority of it is in scope, and the taller aspect ratio is used for a 15-minute long sequence an hour and a half into the movie. So it's sort of mostly saved for that one spot, and it doesn't fluctuate. Another thing, personally, to say is I find the title odd. Um, I would have called it Avengers Civil War, because, I mean, perhaps Captain America is somewhat the main character in the movie, but again, that could be debated. Um, this is really an Avengers movie, honestly. In the grand scheme of things, I find it kind of a stretch to call it a Captain America movie. So that just struck me as awkward. Also, that year, 2016, you've got Doctor Strange. This is also back to normal dual ratio and back to excellent 3D. This has so many eye-popping scenes that are just made for it, like when they're making the portals to jump between different locations and those orange things glowing in front of them. That's a perfect fit for 3D, obviously. When you've got an open portal and different depth, like deeper behind it, shallower around it, uh, it's perfect for 3D. But it's also very powerful. And also when crazy things are happening around them, the illusions of the city, what they see, for instance, when they're falling into the sky of the city, it's very brief, but when they're falling into that city skyscape, it's a real eye-popping moment of 3D, very powerful and immersive, especially if you're watching it on a big screen like a projector. The MCU movies are famous for having mid-credits and post-credits scenes to add little bonuses, but usually the post-credit scenes at the very end are in 2D. They don't bother to convert those for some reason. Maybe because people have left the theater, or I don't know what the reasoning is. Whatever, it saves a little money. But anyway, this post-credit scene is one of two so far that is actually in 3D. I don't know how they made that mistake, but sure, I'll take it. And then the next year, 2017, came Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. This was again excellent 3D dual ratio, and they tried something new with this one. In the areas of the movie that had the scope ratio, so it had black bars burned into the top and bottom, they added an extra illusion at times. They would have objects overlapping the black bar. Like with real 3D, that doesn't actually happen. When something comes out of the screen or appears to, it doesn't actually protrude beyond the screen frame. That's impossible, obviously. But since that black bar is a part of the picture, they would have, for instance, an arrow heading into the viewer's face overlap, stick over the edge of that black bar, or other things like a spaceship coming out or flying rocks, etc. They would utilize that black bar and make it a part of the effect. Some other movies have done that too. It's not too common, but it has been done. And then, interestingly, for all that good 3D work, the end credits is where 3D dropped off the face of the earth. Um, like I said, the post-credit scenes usually always 2D, but the many mid-credit scenes are 3D still, while as well as some of the credits often. But in this case, every mid and post-credit scene, and there were multiple, were all 2D. Also that year, Spider-Man Homecoming. You'll notice this is in a clear case. That's because Spider-Man still has distribution rights owned by Sony, so they released the home video version here. Again, this is also in another language, and I'm not sure which one it is. This was all scope ratio and excellent 3D. 2017 was also the first year they had 3 movies released. The last one that year was Thor Ragnarok, and that is again excellent 3D and dual ratio. 2018 again had 3 movies. First of all, Black Panther, which was excellent 3D and dual ratio. And then here's an oddball. Avengers Infinity War. Excellent 3D, but this was theatrically, this was in IMAX, this was all in IMAX ratio, so it all had a tall aspect ratio. But for the Blu-ray 3D, they cropped it all to scope. Not even dual ratio, it's all scope. So you don't get to see that original taller IMAX ratio on this Blu-ray release for some reason. And then the last one that year was Ant-Man and the Wasp. This also had excellent 3D and dual ratio, and it was that other movie that I mentioned that happens to have a post-credit scene that they bothered to convert to 3D. 2019 also had 3 movies. First one was Captain Marvel. Happened to have the slipcover for this. Again, it's excellent 3D and dual ratio. And then the conclusion of that story arc, Avengers Endgame, also have the slipcover for that. Also excellent 3D, but just like Avengers Infinity War, same odd choice. It was made in full tall aspect IMAX and all cropped to scope for the Blu-ray 3D. The last one that year was Spider-Man Far From Home, again released by Sony in a clear case. And this is another foreign version, as you can see. This was good 3D, sometimes excellent. And it was also dual ratio IMAX originally, but the Blu-ray has been cropped to completely scope. So how did Black Widow turn out? Well, the 3D was good. I wouldn't say it was always excellent, just like the latest Spider-Man. It was good, just not excellent like the Avengers movies or Guardians of the Galaxy, etc. It was also dual ratio in IMAX, but not, as far as I know, not really being shown in IMAX 3D in the United States. So you got to choose. Do you want dual ratio 2D or scope 3D? All cropped to scope. And who knows when the Blu-ray come out, if it comes to Blu-ray 3D, because the state of things in that department is so up in the air right now. If it does, will it be all cropped or dual ratio? We don't know, because there's really no consistency at this point. And it's crazy too, so many theaters nationwide have their 3D equipment just sitting there ready to use, and yet so many theaters nationwide are just not screening any 3D movies after reopening. It's the darndest thing. It was going strong right up, directly up to the end of the pandemic. Even the last Star Wars movie got an IMAX 3D release, widespread 3D as well. And then the brief closures of the pandemic, because yes, a lot of theaters stayed open during most of 2020. Even if there weren't a lot of new movies, a lot stayed open still. But regardless, they just stopped showing 3D movies. And right now, 3D options at theaters are very sparse across the country. It's the strangest thing. I can't think of a logical explanation for it either. If people say it's because of germs, no, the glasses are washed and then packaged again, so that's never been an issue. I mean, unless people are paranoid, but otherwise it's not a real issue. And a very interesting experience, too. At the theater I happened to find that was showing it. And from what I can suspect, because it was opening day on Thursday evening, uh, this very well may have been their first 3D screening in well over a year. This was at a Regal cinema, and I don't even know if they tested their equipment first because the movie started in 3D, um, and it was double image. You could see the 3D actively, but obviously when you look through the glasses, you're seeing both in both eyes. So I'm wondering if they even had their Real D attachment connected to the projector. For those of you who don't know, the way it works is they've got DLP projectors that flicker the left and right images back and forth. And usually you would use shutter glasses in conjunction with that to filter out the images. But of course that would be expensive for everyone in attendance, plus troublesome with batteries and all. So what they do is Real D puts the shutter glasses effectively on the projector. It's a polarized filter that flickers in sync with the flickering of the projector and flickers the polarity of the output light. And then those cheap sunglasses you wear with Real D on them, that filters out the left and right images. So anyway, because everyone was seeing double image, I suspect they didn't have the Real D attachment attached or even turned on. I don't know. But regardless, it took like 15 minutes for them to get their stuff together and start playing it right. They're out of practice, I guess. So we'll see what happens with 3D going forward. If excellent 3D conversions as opposed to decent make a comeback, or if it's economically viable. And it only can be if theaters utilize the equipment they already have sitting around. That's how it works. Maybe they'll figure it out. I don't know. Maybe they'll also sell their movies that they already have laying around in 3D on 3D Blu-ray, because oddly enough, you make money from your assets by monetizing your assets. It's crazy, I know. Maybe they'll figure it out too. Who knows? Anyway, this has been the review of the MCU in 3D. Whoa.